before the story begins, know this. What follows is drawn from legend, shadow, and the spaces where folklore refuses to die. Listener discretion is advised. In Tokyo, there is a question people are taught never to answer. A question so simple, so ordinary, that most victims never realize their mistake until it is far too late. They say she walks the empty streets after midnight, always alone, always beautiful, always wearing a mask. If she stops you and asks you one simple question, your answer decides how you die. This is the legend of Kuchisake-Onna, the Slit-Mouthed Woman. The vending machine hummed its fluorescent lullaby into the empty street, casting Takeshi Yamamoto in harsh blue light as he fumbled for coins. It was 17 minutes past midnight in Sujinami Ward, and the last train had deposited him here 40 minutes ago. 40 minutes of walking through progressively quieter streets, past shuttered izakayas and sleeping houses, toward the small apartment where his wife had long since stopped waiting up for him. He was thinking about the Nakamura account. He was always thinking about the Nakamura account, or accounts like it. The endless parade of numbers and projections and quarterly targets that had consumed the last 11 years of his life and left him, at 34, with a receding hairline and a marriage that communicated primarily through post-it notes on the refrigerator. The can of Boss coffee dropped into the collection slot with a hollow thunk. Takeshi retrieved it, cracked the tab, and took a long swallow of cold sweetness that did nothing to wake him up, but gave his hand something to do. That was when he heard the footsteps. They were soft, measured, the particular cadence of heels on pavement, not the sharp crack of stilettos, but something lower, more deliberate. A woman's walking shoes, perhaps, the kind worn for long distances. He turned, more out of reflex than concern. Tokyo was safe. Everyone knew Tokyo was safe. The crime statistics proved it. The international rankings confirmed it. And 11 years of late-night walks through residential neighborhoods had given him no reason to doubt it. She was standing beneath a streetlight 30 meters away, and his first thought was that she was beautiful. His second thought was that something was wrong. She wore a beige trench coat, belted at the waist. A medical mask covered the lower half of her face. Common enough in Japan, even before the pandemic years, even now that those years had receded into memory. Her hair was long and black, falling past her shoulders in a way that caught the light and seemed to drink it. She stood very still, watching him, and the stillness itself was what made Takei's hand tighten around the coffee can. No one stood that still. Not naturally. Humans shifted their weight, checked their phones, adjusted their bags. They existed in constant small motion, puppet twitches of life that the brain registered without conscious thought. This woman was a photograph, a painting, something frozen in time and space, observing him from across the distance of the empty street. "Good evening." Her voice carried clearly through the night air, soft and melodic, polite in the formal register, the kind of voice that worked reception desks and made announcements on train platforms. "I apologize for startling you." "Not at all," he said. And the response came automatically. 11 years of corporate conditioning producing the appropriate social lubrication. "It's quite late." "Are you lost? Do you need directions?" She began walking toward him. Her footsteps maintained that same measured rhythm. Not hurrying, not hesitating. Each step covered exactly the same distance as the one before it, mechanical in its precision. The vending machine's hum seemed to grow louder in Takeshi's ears. Or perhaps that was his heartbeat, quickening for reasons his conscious mind hadn't yet identified. "You're very kind." She stopped, 5 meters away. This close, He could see that her eyes were dark and liquid, framed by lashes that cast shadows on her cheekbones. The mask hid everything else. Her nose, her mouth, the shape of her jaw. "May I ask you something?" "Of course." "Am the first beautiful?" The question hung in the air between them, strange and childlike. Takeshi felt a laugh building in his chest, nervous, confused, but something in her eyes stopped it before it could escape. She was waiting for his answer with an intensity that seemed to compress the space around them, to draw the shadows closer. "Yes," he said. Because it was true. Because those eyes and that hair and that stillness added up to something striking, something that would have turned heads in any crowded room. "Yes, you're very beautiful. Thank you." She reached up and removed the mask. The scream that built in Takeshi's throat never found its way out. His body locked. Coffee can slipping from fingers gone nerveless, clattering on the pavement and rolling toward the gutter in a lazy spiral. His mind tried to process what his eyes were showing him, tried to fit it into some framework of understanding, and failed. Her mouth extended from ear to ear, not a wound. Nothing so fresh, so explicable. The flesh had healed into thick ridges of scar tissue, pink and white, and glistening faintly in the streetlight's glow. The corners of her lips stretched toward her earlobes in a permanent, terrible smile, exposing teeth that should have been hidden, gums that should have been private. It was a mouth that had been opened, widened, transformed into something that could never close properly again. And yet she was still beautiful. That was the horror of it. The eyes above that ruined mouth were still dark and liquid and lovely. The hair still fell in perfect waves. The proportions of her face still suggested the woman she had been before. Beauty and atrocity existed in the same space, occupying the same features, and Takeshi's mind cracked along the fault line between them. Am I still beautiful? He couldn't answer. His jaw worked soundlessly, producing nothing but small wounded sounds that might have been attempts at words. "You should run," she said, almost gently. "You have 3 seconds." Takeshi Yamamoto had not run in 7 years, not since his university days on the track team. But the body remembers what the mind forgets. And his legs were moving before his thoughts could catch up, carrying him down the empty street in a desperate sprint that burned his lungs and sent his briefcase flying from his shoulder. He heard her footsteps behind him, the same measured rhythm. Not running, walking, and yet somehow, impossibly, growing closer. They found Takeshi Yamamoto the next morning, collapsed against a chain-link fence at the edge of a construction site 3 blocks from the vending machine. His eyes were open and staring, his face frozen in an expression of absolute terror. There was no blood, no visible wounds, no sign of struggle or violence. His heart had simply stopped. The attending physician noted it as cardiac arrest, likely stress-induced. His widow accepted this explanation with the numb grief of a woman who had already lost her husband years ago to overtime and ambition. His colleagues observed a moment of silence and then returned to the Nakamura account. The coffee can was found by a sanitation worker 2 days later, crushed flat by passing traffic. The medical mask was never recovered. And in the shadows of Tokyo's endless nights, a woman in a beige trench coat continued walking, searching, asking her question to those unfortunate enough to answer. Her name, before death transformed it into legend, was Hanako Shimazaki. She had been born in Osaka, the daughter of a mid-level bureaucrat and a piano teacher, and her childhood had been precisely as unremarkable as that parentage suggested. Good grades, piano, recitals, the proper trajectory toward a respectable marriage and a comfortable life. But Hanako had been beautiful, not merely pretty. Pretty girls were common as cherry blossoms blooming briefly before fading into the ordinary. Hanako possessed something rarer. The kind of beauty that rearranged the geometry of any room she entered, that made strangers forget what they were saying mid-sentence, that opened doors which remained firmly closed to women of lesser symmetry. By 23, she had leveraged that beauty into a position as a hostess at one of Tokyo's most exclusive clubs, where politicians and executives paid extraordinary sums for the privilege of her conversation. By 25, she had attracted the attention of Kenji Shimazaki. Kenji was not handsome. His face was broad and unremarkable, his body already running to fat despite his youth. His presence utterly forgettable in any context that didn't involve the careful deployment of power. But power he possessed in abundance. The Shimazaki family had produced Diet members for 3 generations, and Kenji was being groomed for a cabinet position before he'd finished law school. His money was old, his connections were older, and his ambition was the only thing about him that might be called beautiful. He wanted Hanako because she was exquisite, because other men wanted her, because possessing her would demonstrate to the world that Kenji Shimazaki could acquire anything, anyone, regardless of how far above his natural station they might otherwise float. Hanako accepted his proposal because she was 26 and pragmatic, because her beauty was a depreciating asset in a culture that worshipped youth, because the life he offered, the house in Shibuya, the summers in Karizawa, the status of a politician's wife, was better than any alternative her family could arrange. Love was not discussed. It was not expected. They were both too intelligent for such fantasies. The wedding was covered by 3 major newspapers and 2 television networks. Hanako wore a kimono that had been worn by Kenji's grandmother and great-grandmother before her. Its silk heavy with the weight of tradition, its pattern speaking of continuity and lineage and a future that stretched forward into generations not yet born. What the cameras didn't capture was the way Kenji's hand tightened on her wrist during the reception, the first of many small cruelties that would accumulate over the years like snow on a mountainside. What the society columns didn't mention was the separate bedrooms, initiated within the first month. What nobody outside that house in Shibuya ever knew was the particular quality of silence that filled its rooms, a silence with weight and texture, and the faint electrical charge of hatred held perpetually in check. Hanako became very good at silence. She learned to move through her days like a ghost, present at the required functions, absent in every way that mattered. She smiled for photographs and made conversation with wives of other powerful men, and pretended not to notice when her husband's eyes followed younger women across crowded rooms. She pretended not to know about his own affairs, the actresses, the hostesses, the succession of beautiful young things who believed his lies about leaving his wife. He would never leave her. She understood this with a clarity that felt like ice in her chest. His image required a wife, and she played the role too perfectly to be replaced. The loneliness of that understanding was vast and cold and entirely private. Her first affair began 3 years into the marriage, with a junior aide in Kenji's own office. It was reckless and intoxicating and ultimately brief. The aide was transferred to a district office in Hokkaido, and Hanako learned to be more careful. The affairs that followed were conducted with the precision of military campaigns. She chose men who had as much to lose as she did, men who understood discretion, men who wanted her body but not her complications. She took what pleasure she could and gave nothing of herself away, and the secret life she built became the only part of her existence that felt real. Kenji suspected nothing. He was too absorbed in his own ascent to notice the small rebellions taking place in his peripheral vision, until the night he came home early. It was October, and the leaves in the garden had begun their slow transformation from green to gold. Hanako was in her bedroom, their bedroom, technically, though Kenji hadn't slept there in years, with a man whose name she would later be unable to remember. A consultant from Kobe, perhaps. A visiting academic. Someone forgettable, which had been the point. She heard the front door open, heard the familiar weight of her husband's footsteps in the hall, heard them stop outside the bedroom door. Time stretched like taffy. Each second, an eternity of crystallized dread. The door opened. Kenji stood in the doorway, his broad face unreadable, his small eyes moving from Hanako to the man beside her, to the scattered evidence of their intimacy. He said nothing. The silence stretched and stretched until it felt like it might snap. The man from Kobe, or wherever, grabbed his clothes and fled, brushing past Kenji with mumbled apologies that went unanswered. Hanako heard his footsteps on the stairs, heard the front door slam, heard the engine of his car starting and then fading into the distance of the city night. Still, Kenji said nothing. "Well," Hanako said, and her voice emerged steadier than she'd expected, flat and calm and empty of apology. "Now you know. I've always known." The words struck her like a physical blow. She watched him step into the room, close the door behind him with a soft click, lean against it with his arms crossed over his barrel chest. "Every one of them," he continued, his voice almost conversational. "The aide from my office. The architect who designed the Karuizawa house. The journalist who interviewed you for that magazine piece. Did you think I wouldn't keep track? Then why? Because it served my purposes." He smiled, and the smile was worse than his silence. A beautiful, faithless wife. The sympathy it generates when leaked to the right people, the leverage it provides when needed. He pushed himself away from the door, began walking toward her. "You've been useful, Hanako. A scandal in waiting, always one phone call away from ruining you." She understood then, with a cold certainty that settled into her bones, that she had never been a wife. She had been an investment, a tool, a weapon he'd kept in reserve, its edge maintained through careful observation. But your usefulness has limits. He was close now, close enough that she could smell the whiskey on his breath, the faint sourness of a day spent in meetings and maneuvering. "I've been offered a cabinet position, Minister of Health. Do you understand what that means?" "Congratulations. It means scrutiny, background checks, journalists with nothing better to do than dig through old scandals." His hand came up, and she flinched, but he only touched her face, a gentle stroke along her cheekbone that made her skin crawl. "You're a liability now. One I need to neutralize. Divorce me then, and admit my marriage failed. Allow you to sell your story to the highest bidder." He laughed, and the sound had no humor in it. No. I have a better solution." The first blow came without warning, snapping her head to the side, filling her mouth with the copper taste of blood. The second drove her to the floor. What followed was not the hot violence of rage, but something colder, more methodical, a systematic dismantling of everything she had been. He broke her beauty the way another man might break a vase, with precision and purpose, ensuring that what remained would never be valuable to anyone again. She didn't scream. Some part of her, stubborn to the end, refused to give him that satisfaction. When he produced the razor, retrieved from his coat pocket, its presence planned, premeditated, she felt something beyond fear settle over her like a shroud. This was how it ended. This had always been how it would end. "Your mouth," he said, kneeling beside her, his face as calm as if he were discussing stock prices. That beautiful mouth that whispered lies to all those men. "I'm going to open it properly. Let everyone see what you really are inside." The blade touched her cheek, just at the corner of her lips. She felt it bite. She felt the hot run of blood down her jaw. "Smile for me, Hanako." He cut. She didn't die. immediately. That would have been a mercy. And Kenji Shimazaki had never shown mercy to anyone. He left her there on the bedroom floor, her face open like a flower, her blood soaking into carpet that had cost more than most people earned in a year. He took a shower, changed his clothes, called a number that connected him to people who solved problems like this. Then he left for the evening session of a diet committee meeting, secure in the knowledge that by the time he returned, there would be no evidence that Hanako Shimazaki had ever existed. The cleaners arrived 40 minutes later to find her still breathing. Barely. Her pulse was a thread, her skin cold and gray, her eyes open and staring at nothing. They did what they'd been paid to do. Wrapped her in plastic, loaded her into a van, drove her to a location where bodies could be disposed of without questions. They didn't check if she was dead. Why would they? No one survived wounds like that. Not without immediate medical attention. Not with that much blood loss. She would be gone by the time they reached the disposal site. And that would be the end of it. Except Hanako did not die. She lay in the back of that van, wrapped in plastic and darkness, and she refused to die. Hate kept her heart beating when physiology suggested it should have stopped. Hate kept her lungs drawing air through a mouth that could no longer close. Hate anchored her to the world of the living with hooks that went deeper than flesh and bone. And something heard her hate. Something old and patient and hungry. Something answered. The space between life and death was neither light nor darkness, neither warm nor cold. It was an absence. A void where color and sensation had no meaning, where time moved in directions that human consciousness was never designed to perceive. Hanako drifted through that void, her thoughts fragmenting and reforming like clouds in a storm. She was aware of her body. Somewhere far below, a broken vessel leaking life onto plastic sheeting. She was aware of a pull toward something beyond, a dissolution of self that promised peace, oblivion, an end to everything she had been. She resisted. The hooks of her hate held her fast. Interesting. The voice came from everywhere and nowhere, neither male nor female, ancient beyond reckoning. It vibrated through the void like the lowest note of a temple bell, felt in the bones rather than heard with ears. You should have passed by now. Most do. At this point, the threshold is so very close, and what lies beyond it is restful. A pause, contemplative, but you anchor yourself with such determination, such delicious fury. Hanako tried to speak, but she had no mouth here. Or rather, the mouth she had was ruins, incapable of forming words. The being seemed to understand, nonetheless. Your husband. Yes, I see it all. The years of swallowed humiliation, the final betrayal, the blade that opened you like a gift. Another pause. Longer this time. You want revenge. It was not a question. The being manifested then, taking shape from the void's nothingness. It was tall, impossibly tall, with skin the gray-blue of thunderclouds and eyes that held no whites. Only darkness shot through with distant lightning. Its face might have been human once, but the features had been stretched and refined into something too elegant, too symmetrical, too much to look at directly. It wore robes that seemed woven from shadow itself. And when it moved, the fabric rippled like water in a moonless pond. I am called many things, it said, in many languages. The imbalance keeper, the grudge holder, the one who waits at crossroads where justice and vengeance meet. It smiled, and the smile revealed teeth that were too numerous, too sharp, too perfectly white. In your tongue, I have been named Oni, though that word has been cheapened by time and distance. I am older than the name, older than the islands that gave birth to it. What do you want? Hanako's thoughts formed the question, and the being received it like a gift. Want? I want nothing. I require nothing. I am complete unto myself, and have been since the first murder between brothers. It circled her, or she circled it. Direction had no meaning in this place, but I am interested. Interested in patterns, in imbalances, in debts unpaid and scales untipped. Your husband took something from you, something precious and irreplaceable. And in doing so, he created an imbalance. He took my face. He took more than that. He took your life, not by killing you, which would have been honest, but by rendering you unable to live it. He took your future, your children never born, your pleasures never experienced, your slow decline into dignified age. The being's voice deepened, resonating with something that might have been anger, or might have been anticipation. He took your death, too. The peaceful passage that was owed to you. He transformed it into this thrashing, this clinging, this refusal to let go. I won't let go. Not until he pays. Yes, I understand completely. The being stopped moving, faced her directly with those lightning dark eyes. I can give you what you need. A return. A second existence. Bound to the mortal world until your business is finished. You will walk the night. You will hunt. You will ask your question and receive your answer. And those answers will determine fates. What question? You already know the question. It burns in what remains of your thoughts like a coal that cannot be extinguished. The being leaned closer, and its breath, if breath it was, carried the scent of incense and old blood. Am I beautiful? That is what you will ask. And the answer will tell you everything you need to know about the man who gives it. And if he says yes, he sees only the mask, only the surface. He is the kind of man who looked at you in life and saw only beauty, only use, only the reflection of his own desires. He is guilty of the small cruelties that made your husband possible. He does not deserve death, but he must be shown what lies beneath. And if he says no after you remove the mask, he is honest. Cruel, perhaps, but honest. He sees you as you truly are and speaks his truth without flattery or deception. Such men are rare enough to be spared. What if he cannot answer at all? The being smiled again. And this time, the smile held something like satisfaction. Then he is your husband's kind. The kind who turns away from truth, who refuses to acknowledge what they've done. The kind who left you bleeding on the floor while they attended committee meetings. The smile widened. Those ones belong to you. Hanako considered this, or what remained of Hanako did, her consciousness flickering like a candle in wind. She understood that this was a bargain. She understood that bargains with beings like this carried costs that were never fully explained. What do you get from this? Clever. Even now, even broken as you are, you ask the important question. The being's eyes flickered with something that might have been approval. I get the pleasure of watching imbalance corrected. I get the satisfaction of seeing patterns complete themselves. And I get you, your story, your hunt, your eventual resolution added to my collection. I am a keeper of such tales, a curator of vengeance, enacted, and debts repaid. That's all. That is everything. Stories are the only currency that matters to beings like myself. The rest is merely details. The being extended one long-fingered hand, palm upward. Do we have an agreement? Hanako thought of Kenji's face above her in that bedroom, calm as he cut. She thought of the years of silence, the accumulating small cruelties. The way he'd kept her affairs, catalogued like entries in a ledger. She thought of the man from Kobe fleeing into the night, leaving her to her fate without a backward glance. She thought of her mother's piano lessons, her father's quiet pride, the girl she had been before beauty became her only currency. Yes, the being's hand closed around something invisible, and Hanako felt herself pulled back toward the world of the living, pulled through layers of void and darkness and pain until she crashed back into her body like a stone dropped into deep water. She opened her eyes. She was lying in a drainage ditch at the edge of a construction site, wrapped in plastic sheeting that had been slit and discarded. Dawn was breaking over Tokyo, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold that seemed to mock the horror of her existence. Her face still bore the wound, but it had healed. After a fashion, the raw edges had knitted themselves into the scar tissue she would carry forever. The eternal smile that no amount of surgery could repair. She sat up. She stood. She began to walk. The rules of her existence revealed themselves slowly, over weeks and months and years that blurred together like watercolors in rain. She could not be seen by daylight. Not truly seen. People's eyes slid past her, their minds refusing to register her presence. She was a ghost in the noonday sun, invisible to a world that had no place for her. But night was different. Night belonged to her. When darkness fell over Tokyo, she became solid, became real, became present in a way that drew attention she no longer wanted. She learned to wear the mask, to cover the evidence of her husband's cruelty, to present a face that passers-by could accept without flinching. She learned the rules of the question. Some men ran when she asked. Most ran, in fact, their instincts screaming warnings that their conscious minds couldn't articulate. These she let go. At least the first time. The question had been asked and answered, after a fashion. Running was its own form of truth. Some men answered yes, and she removed the mask, and they saw what lay beneath. Some of these also ran, and she let them go with the knowledge that they would never forget what they'd seen. Others froze, unable to process the truth of her face, and these she killed. Quickly, mercifully, because their paralysis marked them as her husband's kind. The kind who looked away from suffering. The kind who pretended not to see. Some men answered no, even before she removed the mask, and these she rewarded with their lives and a story they would never be able to tell without sounding mad. And some, a very few, looked at her ruined face and said yes again, said she was still beautiful, said it with such conviction that she almost believed them, and for these she had no response at all. She walked away from them as if they were ghosts, leaving them to wonder if they dreamed the entire encounter. The demon had given her other gifts as well. She could not be photographed. Cameras that caught her image produced only static, corruption, meaningless artifacts of light and shadow. She could not be recorded. Digital files that captured her voice degraded within hours, becoming hisses and whispers and sounds that human throats could never make. She could not be contained. Locks opened at her touch. Walls failed to impede her. Barriers that kept ordinary beings at bay parted before her like curtains. But she was bound by rules as well. She could not enter a home without invitation, though invitation could take many forms, from an open window to a whispered name spoken in fear. She could not harm children, whose innocence formed a shield she could neither penetrate nor desire to. And mirrors showed her true face, the face beneath the mask, the face that had been carved into her by her husband's hand. She avoided mirrors. Most importantly, she could not die. Not truly. Injuries healed. Attempts at self-destruction failed. Even the rare encounter with someone willing to fight back, a drunk with a knife, a paranoid old man with a baseball bat, produced only temporary inconvenience. She was not alive in any meaningful sense. But death refused to claim her while her business remained unfinished. And her business was very specific indeed. Kinji Shimazaki had risen, as expected, to the position of Minister of Health. He had remarried. A younger woman, plainer, less likely to embarrass him with her beauty or her appetites. He had prospered, his name appearing in newspapers alongside carefully managed stories of policy achievements and charitable donations. He had aged, the years adding weight and gravitas to his unremarkable face. He had never been punished for what he'd done to her. The cleaners who'd disposed of her body were dead. Accidents, all of them, spread across years and carefully varied in method. The evidence of her existence had been erased, filed away, forgotten. But Hanako remembered, and with each man she killed, each reflection of her husband's cruelty, each echo of his contempt, she felt herself drawn closer to the source. The demon's curse was a compass needle pointing always toward true north. And true north was Kenji Shimazaki's corrupt heart. She would reach him eventually. She would ask him the question, and his answer, whatever it was, would end nothing and everything at once. The legend of Kuchisake-Onna began as whispers among late-night commuters, urban legend traded like currency in chat rooms and social media posts. It grew into news reports of mysterious deaths, medical examiners puzzled by cardiac arrests with no apparent cause. It evolved into a cultural phenomenon, a warning mothers gave their children, a story told at drinking parties to make young women clutch their companions' arms. Tokyo learned to fear the masked woman who walked its streets at night. And somewhere in the shadows, a being older than the islands themselves watched and waited and smiled its terrible smile, pleased with the pattern as it unfolded. The city had been keeping secrets for a long time. Detective Yuki Tanaka had been with the Tokyo Metropolitan Police for 16 years, and she had learned in that time to trust two things: evidence and instinct. Evidence told you what had happened. Instinct told you why. Together, they were usually enough to close a case. This case was different. She spread the photographs across her desk, arranging them in chronological order. 17 victims over 4 years, scattered across different wards, different precincts, different investigative teams. 17 healthy men, most of them between 30 and 50, most of them professionals of one kind or another, who had died of apparent heart failure with no underlying cardiac conditions. 17 cases that nobody had connected until Yuki started digging. It's circumstantial. Her partner, Detective Kenji Mori, no relation to the minister, she checked, leaned against the doorframe with his arms crossed. Cardiac arrest happens. These men were all high-stress types, overworked, probably had lifestyle factors that didn't show up in the autopsies. Look at the locations. Yuki tapped the map she'd pinned to her wall, red dots marking each death. All of them within 5 kilometers of the victim's workplace or transit route. All of them between 11 p.m. and 3 a.m. All of them alone, in low-traffic areas, with no witnesses. That's the profile of cardiac arrest in general. People drop dead when they're alone. It's not a conspiracy. It's not cardiac arrest, she said, and she pulled up the coroner's reports on her laptop, scrolled to the sections she'd highlighted. Look at the histamine levels, the cortisol spikes. These men weren't having heart attacks. They were dying of fear. Mori frowned, pushing himself off the doorframe to look over her shoulder. Fear-induced cardiac arrest is extremely rare. You're talking about, what? Fright that's so intense, it literally stops the heart? That's exactly what I'm talking about. Yuki clicked to another file. CCTV footage from a convenience store near one of the death sites. Watch this. This is Takeshi Yamamoto, victim number 12, approximately 2 minutes before his estimated time of death. The footage was grainy, low resolution, but clear enough to show a man in a business suit buying coffee from a vending machine. He turned, seemed to see something off camera, and his body language changed. Shoulders rising, weight shifting backward, the universal posture of someone confronted with something unexpected. Then, the footage corrupted. Static filled the screen, horizontal lines tearing through the image, the timestamp flickering and resetting. When it stabilized, 3 seconds later, the man was gone. Equipment malfunction, Mori said, but his voice had lost its skepticism. Equipment malfunction in 17 different locations, all within seconds of the victim's last confirmed sightings. Yuki pulled up more files, more footage, all showing the same pattern. A man walking alone, a subtle shift in posture, corruption, emptiness. I've talked to the tech teams. These aren't power surges or damaged files. The corruption patterns are wrong. It's like something is interfering with the recording itself. Something that doesn't show up on camera. Something that these men encountered in the moments before their deaths. She turned to face her partner, aware of how this sounded, aware that 16 years of credibility were balanced on a knife's edge. There's a pattern here, Kenji. And I don't think it's human. Mori was quiet for a long moment, his expression unreadable. Then he sighed and pulled up a chair, settling in beside her. Okay. Let's say you're right. Let's say there's something out there killing these men. What do we do about it? We can't arrest a ghost. We can try to understand it. Yuki turned back to her laptop, opening a folder she'd labeled Folklore. I've been doing research. There's a legend, old, pre-war at least, about a woman with a scarred face who appears at night and asks people if she's beautiful. The stories vary, but the core is always the same. Wrong answer. You die. Kuchisake-Onna, Mori said, and he said the name slowly, as if tasting it. My grandmother used to tell us about her. Said she was the reason we shouldn't walk alone after dark. The legend has been around for decades, maybe longer, but the modern version, the one that appears in online discussions, in newspaper articles, in police, reports filed by witnesses too frightened to stay anonymous, started appearing about 4 years ago. When your deaths started. Exactly. Yuki pulled up a newspaper article from 4 years prior. A brief item about a construction worker who'd claimed to see a masked woman near a drainage ditch in the early morning hours. I think something happened 4 years ago. Something that created, or awakened, whatever is doing this. Created how? Awakened by what? That's what we need to find out. She opened another file. This one, a list of names she'd compiled through weeks of research. I've been tracking political scandals from around that time. Affairs, corruption, anything that might have resulted in violence. And I found something interesting. The file contained a photograph of a woman at a formal event, beautiful and composed, standing beside a man whose broad face looked vaguely familiar. The caption identified them as Hanako and Kenji Shimazaki at a charity gala 18 months before the first death. Hanako Shimazaki, wife of Kenji Shimazaki, current Minister of Health. She disappeared 4 years ago, reported missing by her husband a week after the construction. Workers' sighting. Her body was never found. Her case was closed within 3 months, ruled as probable suicide due to personal difficulties. Yuki's voice was flat, controlled. There was no investigation, no follow-up, no questions asked. Mori studied the photograph. His expression troubled. You think she's the woman in the legend? I think she was killed. And I think whoever killed her is still out there, benefiting from her disappearance. Yuki closed the laptop, met her partner's eyes. I want to look into Kenji Shimazaki. His finances, his contacts, his movements 4 years ago. I want to know what really happened to his wife. That's a dangerous road. He's a cabinet minister. He's got connections that could end both our careers. I know, she said. And she stood, began gathering the photographs from her desk. But 17 men are dead, Kenji. Maybe more if there are cases I haven't found yet. And something is out there killing them. Something connected to that woman and that man and whatever happened 4 years ago. And if you're right, if you find proof that a cabinet minister murdered his wife and that she, somehow, came back, then we stop her if we can. Stop him if we can't. Yuki slipped the photographs into a folder, tucked them into her bag. But first, we need to understand the pattern. Figure out who she's targeting and why. Maybe then we can predict where she'll strike next. Or we could do what the legends say and just not walk alone after dark. Too late for that, she said, and she shouldered her bag, headed for the door. We're already walking alone, Mori. We have been ever since we started asking questions. The pattern, as it emerged over the following weeks, was damning. Of the 17 victims, 14 had some connection, however tenuous, to Kenji Shimazaki's political machine. Campaign donors, lobbyists, corporate executives whose companies had benefited from his legislative influence. Men who'd been at parties where he was present, been photographed shaking his hand, been mentioned in the same breath as his inevitable rise to power. The other 3 seemed unconnected. Yuki filed them away as potential false positives, statistical noise, in a signal that was becoming clearer by the day. She interviewed family members who described final phone calls filled with unusual anxiety. She spoke to coworkers who remembered their colleagues mentioning strange encounters. A woman in a mask, a feeling of being watched, a persistent sense that something was following them home. She compiled a timeline that showed the deaths accelerating, growing more frequent as the months passed, as if whatever was hunting these men was growing impatient. And she dug into Kenji Shimazaki's past, peeling back layers of carefully maintained image to reveal the rot beneath. The affairs were an open secret in political circles. Everyone knew. No one spoke. The financial irregularities were harder to trace but impossible to hide completely. Shell companies and offshore accounts that funneled money from sources that would never survive public scrutiny. The violence was rumored but unproven. Staff members who'd quit suddenly with non-disclosure agreements and generous severance packages. A first wife who'd died in a car accident that had never been adequately explained. Hanako had been his second wife. Yuki wondered if there would have been a third. Had things gone differently? He's untouchable. Mori dropped a folder on her desk. 6 weeks into their investigation, I reached out to every contact I have. Called in every favor I'm owed. Nobody will talk about Shimazaki. Nobody will even admit they know anything worth talking about. That's not nothing. That level of silence takes effort to maintain. It also takes power. The kind of power that can make 2 detectives disappear just as easily as it made his wife. Mori sat down heavily, ran a hand through his thinning hair. I'm starting to think we should drop this, Yuki. Go back to cases we can actually solve. I found something. She pulled a document from her own folder, passed it across the desk. Medical records from a private clinic. The kind that caters to wealthy patients who want discretion. 3 weeks after Hanako's disappearance, Kenji checked himself in for treatment of stress-related injuries to his hands. Mori scanned the document, his frown deepening. This doesn't prove anything. No. But it suggests something. Injuries to his hands, 3 weeks after his wife vanishes without a trace. She leaned forward, lowering her voice. I think he killed her. I think he beat her, cut her, left her to die somewhere we'll never find the body. And I think, somehow, impossibly, she came back to make him pay. Yuki? I know how it sounds. I know. But the pattern is there, Kenji. She's working her way toward him, one connected man at a time, cleaning up the edges before she reaches the center. Yuki stood, walked to the window, stared out at the Tokyo skyline glittering in the afternoon sun. The question is whether we try to stop her or let her finish what she started. You can't be serious. I'm serious about justice. And if the system won't hold Shimazaki accountable for what he did, if the power, structures he's built make him immune to prosecution, then maybe this is justice. The only kind that's actually available, that's not justice. That's revenge. Is there a difference? When the law fails, when the powerful escape consequences, when victims have no other recourse? She turned back to face him, her expression hard. I became a detective because I believed in the system. But the system is broken, Mori. It protects people like Shimazaki and abandons people like Hanako. Maybe she has the right to take what the system couldn't give her. Mori stood, his chair scraping against the floor. I didn't hear that. And neither did you. If anyone asks. He gathered his things, moved toward the door, then stopped with his hand on the frame. I'm going to keep working this case. Not to help her, but to understand what's happening. Maybe we can find a way to end it that doesn't involve more death. And if we can't, he didn't answer. The door closed behind him with a soft click. Yuki turned back to the window, watching the city that had kept so many secrets for so long. Somewhere out there, a woman in a mask was walking, asking her question, waiting for the wrong answer. And somewhere closer, a man with blood on his hands was beginning to understand that his past had teeth. Kenji Shimazaki first noticed the woman in the mask 3 weeks before the autumn session of the Diet. She was standing across the street from his ministry building, motionless among the flow of pedestrians, her face obscured by a medical mask that seemed wrong somehow. The wrong shape, the wrong color, a relic from another era. He caught only a glimpse before his aide directed his attention to the waiting car. But the image stayed with him, a splinter lodged beneath the skin of his thoughts. He saw her again 2 days later, outside the restaurant where he was entertaining potential donors. She stood at the edge of the parking lot, her beige trench coat buttoned against the evening chill, her dark hair catching the light from the building's windows. His driver asked if something was wrong. Kenji said nothing was wrong, and climbed into the back seat with hands that trembled only slightly. The third time, she was standing outside his home. It was past midnight, and Kenji had risen from bed to get a glass of water, or that was what he told himself. Though the truth was that sleep had become difficult lately, haunted by dreams he couldn't quite remember, but that left him sweating and breathless in the dark. He walked to the kitchen, filled a glass, turned to look out the window at his garden. She was there, standing on the other side of the gate, her masked face turned toward his bedroom window, as still and patient as a stone Buddha in a forgotten temple. The security lights should have triggered when she approached. They remained dark. The guards who patrolled the perimeter should have spotted her. She was completely alone. Kenji dropped the glass. It shattered on the tile floor, water spreading in a puddle that reflected the kitchen lights like scattered diamonds. He pressed his back against the counter, his heart hammering against his ribs, his breath coming in short gasps that fogged the window glass. When the fog cleared, she was gone. He doubled his security. He hired private investigators to identify the woman. He consulted with specialists in personal protection, had his home surveillance system upgraded to military-grade specifications, arranged for armed guards to accompany him at all times. None of it mattered. She appeared at the edge of his vision wherever he went. A figure glimpsed through car windows, a shape in the background of photographs, a presence felt but not seen in rooms that were supposedly secure. His investigators found nothing. His surveillance footage showed only static where she should have been. He stopped sleeping. He stopped eating. His wife, his second wife, the plain one, the safe one, began asking questions he couldn't answer, and when her questions became too persistent, he sent her to their Karizawa house for an extended vacation. He was alone now. Alone with his security guards and his surveillance cameras, and the growing certainty that something was hunting him. On the night of the autumn equinox, Kenji Shimazaki sat in his study, drinking whiskey by the light of a single lamp, and tried to remember a woman named Hanako. It had been 4 years. The memory should have faded, should have joined the other compromises and cruelties that made up his political career. Instead, it had grown sharper, more vivid, as if time were polishing it like a stone in a river rather than wearing it away. He remembered her beauty, the weapon she'd wielded without understanding its cost. He remembered her silence, the passive aggression that had infuriated him beyond reason. He remembered her affairs, cataloged and filed away. Ammunition for a battle he'd never intended to fight. And he remembered the night he'd ended her, the calm that had settled over him as he opened the bedroom door, the precision of his violence, controlled and purposeful, the way she'd refused to scream, even at the end, denying him even that small satisfaction. He remembered the razor in his hand, the resistance of flesh, the blood that had seemed too bright, too red, too alive. Smile for me, Hanako. His own voice, echoing across 4 years of successful forgetfulness. A knock at the study door. Kenji flinched so violently that the whiskey sloshed over the rim of his glass, staining the papers on his desk. Yes? What is it, sir? His head of security, voice muffled by the thick wood. We've had another incident. The cameras on the north perimeter went down about 10 minutes ago. We can't find anything wrong with them. Send more guards. Sir, with respect, we're already stretched thin. If you want, I can call in backup from... No one else comes into this house. Check the cameras yourself, all of them, every angle, and double the patrols around the study wing. A pause. Then, yes, sir. Footsteps, retreating. Kenji set down his glass, noticed that his hands were shaking, clasped them together on the desk to make them stop. His reflection stared back at him from the dark window. Older than he remembered, grayer, the face of a man who had eaten fear for breakfast and found it indigestible. The reflection changed. Not his face, the face behind him. A woman's face, masked and still, standing in the shadows at the edge of the lamplight. She hadn't opened the door. She hadn't made a sound. She was simply there, as if she'd been there all along, waiting for him to notice. Kenji didn't scream. He was beyond screaming, his throat locked tight, his body frozen in his chair. He watched in the window's reflection as she took one step forward, then another, moving with that measured rhythm he'd seen on surveillance footage that shouldn't have been able to capture her at all. Good evening, husband? Her voice was unchanged, soft and melodic, formal in register, the voice of receptions and announcements, and a life that ended on a bedroom floor with a razor across her mouth. You're dead, he said, and the words came out as a whisper, barely audible even in the silent room. I watched you die. You watched me begin to die. There's a difference. She circled around his chair, entering his field of vision, no longer just a reflection, but a presence, solid and real and impossible. It took a long time to finish. Longer than you'd believe. What do you want? He couldn't look at her directly, kept his eyes fixed on the desk, on the whiskey-stained papers, on anything but that mask and what lay beneath it. I want to ask you a question. The same question I've asked so many others on my way here to you. She stopped in front of the desk, reached up with both hands, touched the edges of the mask. Am the first beautiful Hanako. Answer the question. He looked up. He couldn't help it. Some force beyond his control lifted his chin and fixed his gaze on her face. The mask was still in place, hiding everything below her eyes. Those dark and liquid eyes that had once looked at him with something that might have been hope and now held only patience. Yes, he said, and his voice cracked on the word. Yes, you're beautiful. You were always beautiful. That's what they all say. The first time, she removed the mask. Kenji had seen the wound he'd made. He had watched the blade part her flesh, had felt the give of skin and muscle beneath his hand. But seeing the healed result, the scar tissue that stretched her mouth into that permanent, terrible smile, was different. It was his work, preserved and presented for his inspection. Am I still beautiful? He tried to answer. He tried to say yes again, to play the game she'd set up, to give the response that might spare him. But his tongue lay dead in his mouth, and no sound emerged except a thin, high whine that might have been a sob, or might have been a laugh, or might have been something else entirely. You can't answer, she said, and she said it almost gently. That's how I know you're the one. All those others, the donors, the lobbyists, the men who helped you build your empire, they could answer. Wrong answers, mostly, but answers. You're the only one who can't. I'm sorry, he said, and the words burst out of him, ugly and desperate. I'm sorry, Hanako. What I did, I never meant. You didn't think I'd matter. You didn't think anyone would notice. You didn't think the world would hold you accountable. She leaned forward, and her breath on his face was cold, so cold, carrying the scent of incense and old blood. You were right about all of that. The world doesn't care. Justice doesn't exist. The powerful escape, and the victims are forgotten. Then let me escape. Let me. I'm not justice, husband. I'm something older. Something that was waiting in the space between life and death, watching for imbalances like ours. She straightened, stepped back from the desk. I can't kill you. Not yet. The rules are very specific, and your lack of answer, doesn't give me permission. Relief flooded through him, so intense it felt like drowning. But I can wait. I've waited 4 years, I can wait 4 more, or 40, or 400 if that's how long it takes. She moved toward the window, her reflection appearing in the glass. Transparent and terrible. Every time you close your eyes, you'll see this face. Every time you walk a dark street, you'll wonder if I'm there. Every moment of every day for the rest of your life, you'll know that I'm coming, and that nothing you do can stop me. Please, I'll ask you again tomorrow, and the day after, and the day after that. Sooner or later, you'll find your answer. And when you do, we'll finish this at last. She walked through the wall. Not around it, not through a door that opened and closed, through the solid wall itself, as if it were made of nothing more substantial than smoke. Kenji watched her go, watched her dissolve into shadow and silence, watched until there was nothing left to watch, and the study was empty except for himself and the smell of incense and old blood. He stayed in his chair until dawn, unable to move, unable to think, unable to do anything except wait for a question that would come again and again until he found the courage to answer it. In an apartment across Tokyo, Detective Yuki Tanaka stared at her wall of photographs and evidence and supposition, feeling for the first time that she understood the shape of what she was investigating. She wouldn't stop Hanako. She wouldn't try. The case files would be sealed, the evidence filed away, the official conclusion recorded as a series of unfortunate coincidences with no common cause. But she would remember. And when Kenji Shimazaki finally fell, to arrest, to scandal, to the woman in the mask, or to his own corroded conscience, she would be there to document it. Justice might be broken, but witness was still possible, in a space beyond space, where time moved sideways and memory was currency. A being of thundercloud skin and lightning eyes smiled its terrible smile. The pattern was nearly complete, the imbalance approaching correction. Soon, perhaps tonight, perhaps tomorrow, perhaps years from now, the woman would ask her question one final time, and the man would answer, and the story would reach its inevitable conclusion. But not yet. Not quite yet. The being settled back into patience, content to watch and wait. It had collected 10,000 tales of vengeance across 10,000 years, and this one, this particular tapestry of beauty and cruelty and the slow approach of reckoning, was among its favorites. In the filing cabinets of a research institution, 3 continents away, a folder gathered dust. It had been compiled by a Filipino scholar with an interest in comparative mythology, part of a survey of vengeance legends from across Asia. The section on Japanese urban legends referenced Kuchisake-Onna prominently, drawing connections to similar figures in other cultures. La Llorona in Mexico, the White Lady in the Philippines, the Slit-Mouthed Woman's cousins and counterparts scattered across the globe. The scholar had made a note in the margin. Investigate possible connection to similar patterns in European folklore. Contacted Torres family. Spanish records suggest related phenomenon. The folder had not been opened in 2 years, but it would be, eventually. The patterns were beginning to align, the threads beginning to weave together, the web that connected legend to legend across oceans and centuries beginning to reveal its shape. That, too, would be a story worth collecting. And in Tokyo, as the sun rose on another day and the city stirred itself to wakefulness, a woman in a beige trench coat walked the empty streets, her face hidden, her patience infinite, her question waiting to be asked again. She had forever, or close enough to forever that the difference didn't matter. Somewhere, a husband was learning to live with fear. Somewhere, a detective was filing away the truth. Somewhere, a demon was smiling. And the legend continued, as legends always do, whispered in the dark, taught to children, used to explain the unexplainable. The slit-mouthed woman walks the streets of Tokyo. If you meet her, she will ask you a question. Think carefully before you answer. Some questions do not forgive mistakes. The end for now. Thank you for walking these dark roads with us. This story is one thread in a larger tapestry. From Tokyo's empty streets to the hidden villages of the Philippines. From the borderlands of Mexico to the cobblestone alleys of old Europe. These legends are all connected, all waiting. The folklore continues here, in the shadows between uploads. If these stories follow you into the dark, you can find more at Saltline Studio. Until the next tale finds you, keep your salt lines drawn.